So, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you to today's workshop, Feminist View on STI Testings by Anna Wim. Yoo-hoo! And I'm Katja, one of the girls who have organized this festival. And we are in Feminis Veritas, the Eastern European Women Festival. This is the third day of our festival today. And tomorrow we are going to stream a short film called Daughter by Daria Kashayeva. And right now I just want you to know, first of all, that we kindly ask you to take note of the following rules. The workshop will be broadcasted online, just so you know, on our YouTube channel and also just online on our website. So therefore, if you don't wish to be broadcasted or recorded, please switch off your camera. And to get the link to the release of our short film Daughter, you can write an email to frauenfestival_osteuropa@gmx.de. And yeah, I wish you to have a nice workshop today. We are very glad to have Anna here with us. And yeah, I'm excited. So now you can start, Anna.
Okay, so I will just mute you now and I'll take over the mic. So before we get into it, I just want to, first of all, make sure that you all hear me. If you have any issues, feel free to message me into the group chat. I'll be checking that during the lecture. And if you have any questions throughout the lecture, please write them down into the chat room, and I will address them later. And at the end of this around 60-minute lecture, I will open up the mics and we can just have a regular discussion. It's funny because I actually cannot see anyone participating, so it feels like I'm just talking to myself, but that's all right as well. So I will just start off. As I said, first we will have this kind of more like a school-like lecture, and then we can discuss it all together. And I want to kick it off by just introducing myself and why I'm actually doing this workshop and why I'm so interested in this whole topic. So I am a Berlin-based, Czech Republic coming sex educator, and I have been focusing on sex education in the form of IGTV videos, so videos on Instagram, visual art and art installations, and also just articles for, I'd say, around 4 years now. And the reason why I'm so specifically focused on STI testing, what brought me to it was actually my first ever STI testing experience that I had, which now is quite a good anecdote, but back then was a really awful and weird experience. It happened in Copenhagen where I studied, and I just wanted a simple checkup and ended up waiting for my STI testing for 7 hours in a really badly organized, not nice STI clinic. And I got to meet a lot of people that I didn't want to meet there because it was very small and everyone was going there. So I met up with people I knew, so my anonymity was completely compromised. And since then, I've been really interested in the issue of sexual health care, STI preventive care, and also just access to services that allow us to be healthy in terms of STIs and sexual health, and how they are inaccessible in terms of physical barriers or, you know, anonymity or insurance and stuff like that. So I will cover that later. And yeah, this topic is so exciting to me that I decided to focus my whole master's thesis about it. The thesis I'm writing at the Charles University in Prague, and it's basically all about STI testing in Berlin, evaluating STI testing centers and their accessibility for queer femme people. So basically, I identify as a queer woman, and I'm doing it by getting tested routinely on my own. So I'm the, you know, guinea pig of my research, and I just, you know, get my blood drain, pee into a cup every month, and then I evaluate, yeah, how that's going. Just a second, I'm gonna let someone join our lecture. So that's good. And yeah, so I'm focusing my whole thesis onto this topic. And so far, it's been very challenging and very interesting to be doing this research. And it's also kind of inspired what I'm going to be saying here. So it's, you know, this presentation, this lecture will be kind of a summary of the research I have done in the past 3-4 years that I started being interested in STI testing and sexual health care. And I guess we can kick it off and just start off by STIs and stigma. I'm just again letting someone in. So you might have noticed that we have somewhat of a sexual liberation going on for years, and that STIs and actual like using of condoms and getting preventively tested is being more discussed in the public. However, there is still an incredible amount of stigma surrounding STIs. And I just want to, before I get into that, I just want to kind of remind you all what STIs are. So they are sexually transmitted infections. You can get them through sexual intercourse. They are transmitted not only through like genitals on genitals contact, but they can be transmitted also from like mouth to mouth or mouth to ass, penis to mouth, you know, also through touch. Some STIs as HPV are transmitted just by like the touch of infected skin. So there's different STIs. There's so many different STIs, different ways of transmitting them. But what is good is that in the current age, basically all STIs are treatable. Of course, we have HIV/AIDS, but again, there is much more treatment available for that than it used to be in like the 70s. So when someone gets tested positive for an STI, it is, you know, very easily treatable or manageable, so that it doesn't affect the person's general well-being. However, even though we're at this situation where STIs are really not such a big deal, there's still so much stigma. And right now I just want to kind of focus on where that stigma is coming from. So first of all, there's of course this, you know, very long held belief that sex is something, you know, not good, something naughty, something we don't talk about in public. And even though we do talk more about sex, you know, these days, there is still this lack of focus on this kind of responsibility and the negative thing that's attached to sex, which is sexual health and STIs. I'm saying negative in quotation marks because, as I said, everything is treatable, so it's not really that negative. It's STIs are really the same, you know, it's like if you have a sexual contact with people, there is a high chance you will get an STI, but that's the same way as if you have contact with people in general, like, you know, in public or something, just like talking to people, there is a high chance you can get, you know, a virus, you can get, you know, a flu or something like that. So it's really, there's no difference in that. And seeing STIs as something different, as something, you know, not as something connected to this dirty sex, is just, you know, increasing the stigma. And even though we might think that this kind of like dirty sex idea has been around for, you know, it's like an old tradition and that has been around for so long, that's actually not true. If we take into consideration Michel Foucault's history of sexuality, this idea that sex is something naughty is actually quite new. It only started kind of going on a few centuries ago. Before then, it was much more open and much more kind of liberated in that sense of sex being, you know, understood as something normal. And once there was this shift on seeing sex as a tool of reproduction, that's where the stigma and shame around, you know, enjoying it for pleasure came in. So if we see sex as something bad, as something naughty, if we, you know, associate it with promiscuity, of course, STIs will also be seen like that. So that's really like the basis of the stigma. Furthermore, and that goes hand in hand with this, is the shockingly, utterly disgraceful lack of sex positive sex education, or actually any sex education. I myself, I grew up in a small Czech town, and I remember having like throughout the from like 18 years that I went to school there, I remember having maybe like one 50 minutes long class about something like sex education, and that was mostly focusing on like reproduction and like learning about the parts of genitals and stuff like that. So there was really never any actually positive sex education that also focuses on pleasure and doesn't only focus on like the risk of getting pregnant. I don't think we even covered STIs, but if they are covered, often it's just you know, done in a very stigmatized way again, and it's the use of complete abstinency is kind of being preached, which again, the number of your sexual partners does not determine how prone you are to getting an STI. So that's kind of just in your life, you can still get an STI. So really not into this like approach of like, you know, have less sex, you have a lesser chance of getting an STI. That's not true at all. And this is something that's really missing from the curriculum at high schools, even primary schools, because especially, you know, when you look at media and pop culture and stuff like that, you can see a lot of like sexualization, but this is not then transferred to what is being taught, and then there comes this kind of like a limbo, like a vacuum between this like glorification of sexuality, but kind of like suppressance of what's actually related to it. So unless we have a really good sex education that is queer, inclusive, that is not centered on heterosexual penis and vagina reproduction focused sex, there will not be any shift in how we portray STIs and how we actually see sex in general. Sex education from very like low level, from very young age, is the main tool that needs to be addressed, that needs to be used to do something about that. But yeah, so far that's not happening, and this is why we're here now with in 2020 there is still this very lacking situation of access to sexual resources and understanding of why they are important. Furthermore, what's also ingraining this stigma, even though it might look like it's helping our campaigns. For example, I don't know how many of you are from Berlin, but around, oh sorry, there is someone, I need to mute someone, just a second. So as I was saying, in Berlin, all over the U-Bahn and S-Bahn and wherever, there's a lot of ads about like, use condoms if you're sexual, get tested regularly. But of course, that's like a great thing, that this is being addressed. But at the same time, it is difficult to use condoms and get tested when there is a lack of access to it. This is a structural issue, but because we live in a very very kind of society that is very much focused on blaming the individual and trying to make the individual believe that they can change things themselves without seeing the structural systemic issues. These campaigns are being, put everywhere, and it's like, yeah, we're working on better sex education, we're working on better sexual health care of our nation and whatnot. But unless this is addressed systematically, for example, by offering free condoms, or, just offering really good information about how to get STI tested, or offering it for free for people who are not insured, which is something I will touch upon later. These campaigns are kind of just like laughing into our faces, because they're telling us to do something that is not completely possible in the system that we live in. And that's very common in like neoliberal atmosphere. It's like the same way as like the government is telling you to recycle as a person, but then big companies or even the government themselves are not doing anything. So there's always this like putting the blame on the individual, while not addressing that the individuals actually cannot really do anything within the system that already exists. So on one hand, we might see these like ads and campaigns like, oh yeah, this is great, we are finally talking about it. But yeah, they're not really, because there's just no kind of basis for the people to like get onto and act upon, which is something very funny and ridiculous, given that, as I said, sex didn't used to be destigmatized, and actually STIs were seen as just a normal thing, like that was part of everyone's life. If you just think about, you know, how many people we know, how many like famous history figures we know about them, that they were they died of syphilis, or they had gonorrhea and whatnot. Like a few centuries ago, there was really not such a big shame about it. It was just a regular part of everyone's lives, and there was no cure for this. So people really were dying for like STIs like that. But now we have all the cures. It's very easy to deal with STIs. Most of them are actually kind of treated by like one injection or one set of antibiotics, and within a week you're sorted. But there is the stigma that is both in us as people who are sexual, but also in the medical system, that we are completely prevented from getting this healthcare that we could, you know, get now, and just really minimize the amount of STIs that are transmitted. And this can be kind of like confirmed. This theory of like, yeah, we have cures, but we're not really using them, can be confirmed by, for example, the uprising or like the surgence of a so-called super gonorrhea, which is a mutation of regular gonorrhea that started popping up, I think, a few years ago, maybe like 5 years ago, and is on a steady rise, which is a mutation that got to this point from regular gonorrhea not being treated properly, and not being treated with like up-to-date helpful treatments. And this is, you know, this is how it got really like out of control and is just being difficult to treat. And again, that's just part of the stigma playing into the actual threat to our health, our collective but also individual health. So now that we know a bit more that stigma around STIs is coming from, I will move on to what I see, or when I say sexual healthcare, what I see behind that term, what it consists of, and what kind of gives you access to it, which factors might give you or take the access from you. So sexual healthcare, as I understand it and as I work with it, is first of all STI testing, treatment, and prevention. There are usually specialized clinics or centers for that. They can be kind of called something with like venerology or infection focused centers and stuff like that. And their sole purpose is to get you tested, get you treated. And in terms of prevention, for example, we have PrEP and PEP for HIV. So there's some preventive measures that can be taken as well. When I talk about sexual healthcare, I also often include reproductive healthcare. So, you know, just like Planned Parenthood and abortions and birth control access and stuff like that. And also gynecology and urology. So doctors that are specifically focused on dealing with any issues surrounding our genitals. So that's what I see as sexual healthcare. And as I said, I want to talk about which factors might prevent you from accessing the sexual healthcare you need. So as you can see, there's many of them. I'm just gonna quickly go through them. So first of all, you might think, why am I saying genitals there? It is actually proven that women, or I don't want to be a gender essentialist, so people with vulvas, people with uteruses, when they are existing within the medical system and are, seeking cures for what's happening to them, often they are not believed, and their symptoms are kind of overlooked, and only later, once the situation gets more complicated, they get treated. So chances are that if you are someone who has a vulva, who has a uterus, your access to healthcare in general is actually much more limited than someone with a penis. Then, of course, things like disability, race, class, or religion are huge factors that play into access to sexual health care. If we talk about disability in healthcare in general, there are like several issues. One is, of course, the just the issue of actual accessibility, like physical accessibility, whether that's like tools for visually impaired people to be able to get the support they need to understand the like medical practices and stuff like that, whether that's a lack of ramps for people in wheelchairs and stuff like that. But there's also another thing when we talk about disability and healthcare, chronic illnesses and disability, like stable, long-lasting disability, is again also often overlooked and downplayed by medical professionals. So there is this like double-edged sword when it comes to disability and healthcare, and that of course gets projected into sexual healthcare as well. And this is particularly dangerous and just really fucked up, because people with disabilities, of course, are sexual as well. There is this lot of kind of erasure of sexuality of disabled people in our society. But also, disabled people are more likely to be sex workers because of kind of like the lack of paper trail or flexibility, and just being able to like work from your home or something that sex work allows them. And B, they are more likely to be victims of sexual assault, often at hands of their own care workers. So this is why it's incredibly important to make sure that sexual health care is accessible for people with impairments, with disabilities, whether that's physical or mental. But sadly, that is not happening. Again, as all healthcare and access to it is very dependent on one's race and class. And later on, I want to touch upon some racist experiments in healthcare, reproductive and sexual healthcare. And racism in healthcare is a very prevalent issue, and again, that just further projects into sexual healthcare. There's also, if we talk about, for example, Black people, what plays into their access and their treatment in sexual healthcare are also very harmful racist stereotypes that have been around since the age of like enslavement of Black people in the US and all over the world. Sorry, someone is ringing the doorbell here, not for me. These stereotypes, this like over sexualization of Black people, the stereotype of like the Black brute, of the Black women that seduces the white master and stuff like that. And these, even though, you know, this is no longer overtly voiced and portrayed in our, you know, discussions in our media and whatnot, this is still very much ingrained in our understanding of sexuality, of other people, of our sexuality and stuff like that. And at the same time, then there's also these like harmful stereotypes about, for example, Asian people, that they're supposed to be more asexual and stuff like that. So it's not only this like societal structural issue of access to healthcare based on race, which is a very big, you know, thing on its own, but there's also these stereotypes playing into the actual treatment, the actual understanding of the symptoms, of how medical professionals react to their patients and stuff like that. Location, of course, you know, if you are, for example, if you live in Berlin, you're much more likely to be able to access sexual health care, as I myself found out through my research on my MA thesis that is all about that. If you are in, you know, a small town, it is much more difficult to find a specifically dedicated center for it. It is much more difficult to stay anonymous and just also like quickly receive the treatment you want. So that's also a big factor. Sexual orientation also plays a very big role in access to sexual health care. And there is one thing about, you know, whether you're heterosexual or homosexual or any other sexuality that you identify with, but in healthcare often this is seen as like the two binaries, the only two options that you have, which, you know, then contributes to erasure of a lot of experience and a lot of potential danger. And what's actually kind of interesting, or, you know, different from other, from how sexual orientation influences healthcare in general, specifically in sexual healthcare, this is where especially homosexual cis men have some sort of advantage, which then goes, you know, along stigmatization of gay sex and this like connection to like the risk of HIV, but there is much more centers, premises that focus on offering free sexual health care to gay men. But then at the same time, queer women, queer non-binary people are left out of that conversation. There's also this kind of belief that queer women, lesbians having sex is somehow less dangerous than sex that involves a penis. That is completely not true, but it is a big misbelief that is then reflected into what treatment and what just preventive care is offered to a lot of people, and that further allows, you know, things like super gonorrhea to happen because there's just a lot of misinformation and a lot of stigma within the system itself. Then another thing, and that goes hand in hand with race and class, is costs of sexual health care and the need of insurance. As we know, not everyone can, you know, be insured. Not everyone is able to afford healthcare, and also a lot of people are undocumented. But these people are still sexually active. These people are still prone to getting STIs, and even more so because there is a direct link of class and, you know, poorness to the chance of being assaulted, or the chance of you know, your sexual health being more dangerous and stuff like that. So this is a very big and problematic factor. in the excess. And yeah, it's just, it might seem like, oh, sexual healthcare, everyone is doing sex, so everyone is able to get tested, but this is actually not true, and it is very, very structurally limited in terms of who can access it, who cannot, and it leads to a lot of difficulties later, as I pointed out. And now my quite big, pompous hypothesis. So I have already explained to you the stigma around STIs, what is sexual healthcare, and what prevents people from accessing it. And all these things that I talked about, I see as a tool of eugenics. I will quickly explain what eugenics are. That's basically a method or a movement to literally kill out or reduce reproduction of a certain part of the society. For example, Nazis were engaging in eugenics when they were targeting Jews. And while this seems like, a very daring and very kind of weird comparison to compare, this to a lack of access to sexual health care, if we look at it from the bigger picture and if we connect it with the history of access to sexual health care and reproductive health care, there are links that can show that this is an issue that directly affects and kind of sets whose lives are more valuable and whose lives are seen as more disposable. So I will start off by talking about a few examples of how this really obvious eugenics was used in sexual and reproductive health care. For example, and I think I've seen this lately on Instagram, that this is being kind of circulated, this information about an American white pioneer of gynecology who specifically would be buying out Black enslaved women and basically build what we know as modern gynecology on doing really painful experiments on them without any anesthesia, without any, any actual care for them. He would just cut up these women, also invite other people, like other doctor trainees and stuff like that, to look and join in this literal torture of Black enslaved women. And this is where most of the knowledge of gynecology that we receive now is actually coming from, but it is very rarely discussed. And this pattern of doing experiments on Black people, especially Black enslaved people, in the past was nothing uncommon. That was just a very, prevalent thing. And we might think that this is, this kind of ended with the end of slavery. I mean, the question is, has slavery ever ended? Wasn't it just kind of transformed into a more invisible, refined version of slavery? But this, this is not over at all, and there is, it is still very prevalent in healthcare. There is actual proofs of doctors being completely biased against people of color, or believing that Black people feel less pain even these days. There's also the infamous Tuskegee syphilis experiment, which ended in the 1970s, so that's not that long ago, where over, I think, 40 years, Black American men were unknowingly injected with syphilis. They were told that they were receiving free healthcare, but over the time they were injected with syphilis without their knowing, and were, just like monitored and explored, without their knowledge. So completely abused and tortured just for like the benefits of the white mankind, the white doctors. And these experiments, maybe they are being paid now, they're being more transparent, but if we think of wealth redistribution in our society, if we think of who gets access to which jobs, which salaries and stuff like that, they are still predominantly targeting people of color, and especially Black people in the US. But of course, that's not only happening in the US. There's also the issue of planned birth control, which I think that happened in the early 2000s, when that was mostly Black and Latina women who were recommended this birth control implant, Norplant, without actually being aware of potential risks of it. And this was an implant for like 5 years or something, and throughout the time, most of the facilities that kind of convinced them to get this implant closed, and these women were not able to get it replaced and get it removed when they needed. And that was, again, kind of, just like doing an experiment on women and then deciding, oh, this is not actually working, so we will close our facilities, and completely disregarding the life of the women that this implant was tested on. I've been mostly speaking about the US, but this is definitely not just a US-based thing. I mean, colonization and racism runs through, the whole world. And even in the Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia, where I come from, there up to like the mid-90s, there were many cases of forced sterilization of Roma women right after they gave birth. So, and that is also common in the US on Latina birthers or Latina women, on Latina mothers, that right after giving birth, so the women are still kind of in this haze, under like painkillers, under anesthesia and stuff like that, and they're forced to sign something. They are not told specifically what that is, and it is basically a permit to get sterilized, to trick them into being sterilized, because again, their lives and the lives of their children are not seen as that important. And the way I see it, sterilization often is kind of a tool to avoid. So a lot of people associate preventive sexual health care, or like, oh, this is enough to do, is they see it as like, oh, we sterilize people, we give them birth control, and that way we know they cannot get kids, and we are sorted. We like treated their sexual life, so we don't have to worry about more babies, and we don't have to worry about them at all, which again is basically bullshit, because you still have sex even if no babies come out of it. STIs will still come out of it. So this is a very dangerous practice, because often once someone is sterilized, they are seen as no longer requiring so much sexual and reproductive health care, which then leads to the issue of STI spreading. But if just to go back to the examples of eugenics and the sterilization that I was talking about, this is still very commonly done nowadays for women in prison, for trans people, I mean, that's quite a big issue all over the European Union, that sterilization is still required in many, many countries for trans people to transition, like lawfully transition. Also, often people with disabilities are forced to be sterilized, or, you know, are just kind of be made aware of, you know, this as their only option, or something like that. And as I said, I see that as a direct thing leading to people receiving insufficient sexual health care, because a lot of people, and as I said, there's this sex education that only focuses on the reproduction. So if we sort out reproduction, we don't have to care about anything else related to sex, and therefore people are not prone and are not encouraged to receive the sexual health care they need. And there's also the issue also with that is that so since the medical system does not really care about irregular sexual health care as much as they do for like regularly giving people birth control and stuff like that, there is a focus on solving STIs only when they happen, only treating them. In many countries, both in Germany and Czech Republic, also in Denmark, where I used to live, often if you want to get tested for STIs, in order to like do it for free, or even like just get it done by your doctor, by your gynecologist or your GP, house arts, whatever, you need to show symptoms. So there is this focus on like, oh, we will only solve the symptoms once they show, but that is problematic because most STI cases actually go symptomless. B, a lot of symptoms are very kind of ambiguous. So once, you know, the time that you get to a doctor, that the person gets to a doctor with the symptoms, it's already, the STI is already quite developed and could have been spread to many people. So this is really not helpful, and this focus on just solving the issues, not offering actual preventive care, is just further endangering health of already vulnerable people, because again, not everyone has access to healthcare, and if this healthcare is not accessible, is not free, is not included in, you know, what we see as basic healthcare, then it is being charged for, and only some people can afford it. And that's a very hidden but very powerful form of eugenics, because our like capital, then our both social and financial capital, then decides if we get the treatment we deserve. And that is, as I put it here, basically the rich can afford to get treated, and they can afford to get preventive care, because preventive care per se, if you're not showing any symptoms, is often only available if you pay, which goes completely against this like promotion of getting tested regularly every 6 months. And then if your regular treatment costs you in some countries around 100 euros every 6 months, that's not doable for so many people. So therefore the poor just get ill and transfer these illnesses, these infections, and, you know, deal with much more negatives coming out of that. And that is, you know, just how the societal hierarchy plays into the sexual health and you know, the community health of of everyone around us. And why should we as feminists care about this? I mean, I hope that the things that I listed here have already kind of encouraged you to know why to care about it. But personally, the way I see it, it is a feminist issue because healthcare and just access to being healthy, to I just got a bit distracted by letting someone in, but I need to refocus now. So this is a feminist issue because we want our healthcare to be inclusive, and healthcare is directly linked to the thriving of a lot of feminist causes. Especially if we as women, if we go to this very essentialist assumption that feminists are mostly women or femme people, if there are these biases in healthcare, in sexual healthcare, that endanger our health and our whole lives, then we are not able to actually fight for the causes that we want. Also, this is a very racially, disability and class charged issue, and for me, especially, feminism is all about intersectionality, and it's all about also fighting for issues that might not touch upon me personally as a very privileged white cis able-bodied person, but it's also about striving to make the situation better for those who are not so privileged. And a lot of feminism is also about sexual liberation, and also fighting sexual harassment, sexism in general, and sexual healthcare goes, very, very close to when we talk about sexual harassment, sexual abuse, the whole Me Too movement. If you get sexually harassed, you need to receive sexual healthcare, but the sexual healthcare is not inclusive, is not well developed enough, can be very traumatizing for many people. So that's why it's very important for us as feminists to include that in our fight. Also, in general, healthcare is something very basic, and I believe should just be accessible to everyone, regardless of their race, of their class, religion, gender, sexual orientation. And that's what I personally, as a feminist, strive for as well. So to sum up, sexual healthcare might seem as something, or like talking about STIs might seem as something very niche and very kind of, just like a tiny portion of something that is a part of something, like tiny portion of sex that is part of healthcare or whatever. But in the end, when you look at it from a broader picture, and when you put it into the structure of anti-women stands, racism, classism, ableism of the whole healthcare, but also of our society per se, you can see how it is very intricately embedded in there, and it is a very important part of creating a more feminist friendly, queer friendly society that we all want, at least I hope. And that is the end of my exactly 1 hour long talk, and I will now unmute everyone, and if you want, you can ask questions. You can either ask them on your mic, or So, or you can just also type them into the chat. So whatever.
Ja, eine Frage stellen.
Any questions? If not, I can also just ramble on my own. Maybe I could talk a bit more about my thesis and what I have found out so far, because I'm done with my research and I'm struggling a lot with putting it on paper into the actual form of, you know, a thesis, but I have all the information that I want. And meanwhile, if you have any questions, anything you want to, you know, add, or any comments or any love letters, hate letters, whatever, just feel free to write them down in the chat room. So I think some of you joined a bit later, so I will just repeat what my MA thesis is about in case you didn't hear it. So I'm writing it about access to STI testing centers here in Berlin, where I'm based. And I'm doing it by regularly, basically every month, getting tested myself at different facilities. One thing for it is to just like test how it is. Another is to challenge my own fear of getting my blood drawn. That's like my number one fear on this whole world. And to like, in order to get tested for HIV and syphilis and hepatitis, you need to get your blood drawn. So I was thinking, oh, if I, you know, force myself to get tested every month, maybe I will get rid of this fear, which actually happened, and I no longer have any issue with getting my blood drawn. So there's a great outcome out of that. And yeah, so basically I'm my, you know, own guinea pig, my own focus group, and I just go to different places here in Berlin. I schedule appointments, and then I get preventive testing. So far I've been at, I think, 6 places, and I have to say it's been pretty disappointing because I only found one accessible option for people without insurance, which is Checkpoint Berlin on Hermannplatz. But there you have to pay for the testing, and it's getting more and more popular, so it's pretty difficult to get an appointment. There's like, I don't know, like 4 to 5 weeks waiting time. And then you pay up to 25 euros for the tests. And if you test positive for something, you need an insurance for, you know, receiving the treatment. I talk about insurance all the time because, especially in Berlin, there is a lot of undocumented people, a lot of people without, you know, Anmeldung, without insurance, without just, you know, like proper visas and stuff like that. So that's why I think, but also at the same time, Berlin is, you know, known for its like queer scene, for the sexual openness and stuff like that. And that's why I think it's very upsetting that this is not also reflected in the local sexual health care. And yeah, I only managed to find one place that is Checkpoint Berlin that is you know, available like that for people just to like come there and get treated without insurance. There are other places that offer similar services, but they are either only focusing on men who have sex with men. So then, you know, anyone who identifies anywhere on the femme spectrum is not catered to, or they are specifically targeting sex workers or people with like substance addiction and like drug users and stuff like that. So the offer for someone without an insurance is actually very limited. And that's very problematic. As I said, there is a very direct link of someone, someone who is poor, has often less access to insurance and has more danger of either being sexually assaulted or is more prone to being engaged in sex work, and therefore they need to, access these services. Once you have insurance, though, there are many options actually. For you to go to. My best experience so far was with the Center on Z. I recommend you to check it out. And I see one question. Do you have any book recommendations to learn more about sexual health care and the feminist view on it? So unfortunately, there is not many materials specifically focusing on this topic. That is something that I've been struggling with while writing my thesis, and that's why I also kind of decided to, use this very unusual method of research by doing it myself, because there is not much to draw upon right now. There is, however, a lot of feminist books about sexuality. Maybe I can even show you. I have my bookcase right here, so I can show you some things that I would recommend myself. So this book, Psychology of Sex by Meg John Barker, is a very good feminist view on sexuality. There's also a part about polyamory and having open relationships and stuff like that, and that has been very defining in my experience as a sex educator myself. Something that deals with pleasure, but also the downsides of pleasure that are STIs, is the pleasure activism by Adrienne Mary Brown. I very highly recommend this. And also the Ultimate Guide to Sex and Disability. So these are my personal recommendations, but in general, there's rather books that either focus on healthcare specifically or on sex specifically, but not really that would focus on access to sexual healthcare. Actually, I want to recommend you one more book, which is where I was drawing a lot of the examples about medical racism, and that is The Medical Apartheid by Harriet A. Washington. And this is a terrific, but also, extremely difficult, extremely hard book to read about the history of just racist medical experimentation on specifically Black people and their the gynecology, the development of gynecology, the Tuskegee experiment. Everything is included in this book, and this is not only necessary for sexual health care, but for general understanding of racist biases in healthcare, but also in our society. Another question is, you spoke about how queer women are just as likely to contract STIs as other groups. What are common STIs for queer women? What preventive sexual health measures queer women can take? So there is really no difference in, which STIs the queer women, queer men, heterosexual women get. Because one thing is that, the STIs that you have are not really like based specifically on your genitals. Like certain genitals are not more prone to this kind of STIs, and others are to this. There is definitely a bigger rate of, for example, HIV in gay men or cis men, but since even if we talk about lesbian women, there's actually a very small percentage of people who purely identify as like 100% lesbian, 100% gay or something. You have people who are experimenting, people who are bisexual, pansexual. So, all these STIs just rotate all over everyone, and there is not really any specific STI that would be targeting queer women per se. However, when we talk about women or people with vulvas and people who have a cervix, so uterus, cervix, vagina, these people are more prone to experience difficulties with HPV, human papillomavirus, which is transmitted by men as well. There are so many types of it, but certain types only affect cervixes, and then they cause cervix cancer. And in men, in people with penises, they go without symptoms. Unfortunately, for this STI, even if you use condoms, there is still a likelihood of you getting it. It is the most common STI, and most people will have it without any symptoms. Even if you, for example, right now, like 2 weeks ago, I was told by my gynecologist that I had some sort of like an HPV growth on my cervix, and that is the second time I was told that. And often it just clears out on its own, and it doesn't actually develop into cancer. So that is something that people with vulvas, with uteruses, are more prone to than people with penises. But otherwise, all STIs can be caught regardless of your genitals, of your gender or sexual orientation. But the question also is, what preventative sexual health measures can queer women take? So definitely, using protection is important. There are specific protection tools that are specifically designed for lesbian sex, for like vulva and vulva sex, that are dental dams, or you also can get finger condoms or gloves. So this is important, but it's also very important to understand and to be aware of that even if you use protection, you can still transmit an STI. And as I always say, that's just a part of being sexual. It's not a big deal. That's like if you talk to someone, or if you go running in the cold or whatever, there is a likelihood of you getting sick, of getting a virus. That's the same. Like if you want to have sex, there is a chance you might get something, but it is all treatable. It's the same way, like the way, for example, gonorrhea or chlamydia are treated is very similar to how a tonsillitis would get treated. So it's super easy. It's chill. I've had STIs myself. I'm still alive. I'm, still thriving, talking to you all here. So it's okay. Next question. On what level would you say change is most necessary to happen? Legislation, medical qualification, public discourse. So that's quite a difficult, tough question, but I think it has to start on structural level. It has to start by recognizing the importance of sexual health care within, like government, within like the healthcare ministry, within, just the medical pharma itself, and recognizing that this should be part of regular preventative care, and then later get channeled into education. As I said, I think without a sex positive, STI inclusive sex education from early age, I don't think any change is possible, because if we just start targeting people later, like adult people being like, oh, you should get tested, you need to use condoms, but there is no efforts to make them understand or even like learn about which STIs are the risk, how they get transmitted, how they get treated, and there is no help in how to receive the service they need. This is just, kind of empty effort that is not really changing anything on like a structural level. So yeah, I think public discourse is good, but the change needs to start coming from like big structural issues that are changed and reformed to reflect that. Next question. I just wanted to share a bad experience concerning sexual health care. I did a chlamydia test at my gynecologist. She made me pay 50 euros, even though there are 2 free testings per year. I learned about that later. She didn't tell me about this regulation. I found it scandalous. Exactly. So also, as part of my thesis research, I went to gynecologists and I asked for preventive STI tests, and I was told that I would have to pay for that. So that is, that's what I was saying. If you want people to get preventive care, you cannot ask them to pay for it. That is just, people then are never going to do preventive care if they have to pay so much for it. And yeah, that is actually something that also happened to my friend, who later was charged like over 100 euros for STI tests. And there is just so much, I don't even know how to put it, just so much misunderstanding of the importance of sexual health care, even from gynecologists themselves. This is not the first time this happened to me. Also in the Czech Republic, I had to convince my gynecologist to test me for like preventive. Sure, they are healthy and they just are met with like these weird approaches from doctors, like either you have to convince them or you have to pay a lot for it, even if you know that you are like eligible for it, for this care. So yeah, it's really awful that especially this is like coming from gynecologists who are the ones who should care about this the most. And that's another change that I would like to see, is that If you, like, for example, in the Czech Republic, and I think it's the same in Germany, every year you are supposed to get a preventive gyno checkup, where they just like check your uterus, your vagina. In the Czech Republic, they also check your breasts. And I think, you know, an STI test should be a part of it, just without, you know, any question, like, oh, we checked if you don't have, you know, any bumps on your skin, in your like vagina, if you don't have any growth in your uterus, and now we're gonna see if you're not positive for any STI, because, you know, better to test it and to know and treat it early on, before it gets too complicated, like the super gonorrhea I talk about. Because for this super gonorrhea, actually there's no real cure, because it resists all the cure that we have now. And you know, this is really like directly the outcome of STIs not being treated preventively and regularly. And yeah, it just like, it makes my mind stop completely that this is happening, and that we have all these options, but they are not being used for, you know, for what they can be used for, helping people and for just actually relieving the system. Because STI care is actually pretty expensive once you have to address the symptoms. So if we incorporate preventive care, regular testing, this is actually much more cheaper and profitable for the whole medical system, for like governments and stuff like that, compared to only treating the actual things that happen. Another comment, I just wanted to point out that there are differences in countries. An example, I lived in the UK and wanted to get my cervix checked, as I'm used to from my home country. But in the UK, it's only available since the age of 25. Again, we know that HPV directly attacks cervixes of people who have cervixes, of women, if you will. We know that most people get sexually active maybe around the age of 18, depending on the country, you know, the legal age of consent of like when you can be sexually active can be even 14. But then if, you know, getting your cervix checked is only allowed at the age of 25, by that point, you can get real bad complications. And again, that's the issue with like not offering preventive care. And also, like, I really don't understand why there's a rule of like being 25 to get your cervix checked, because actually until 25 you are quite likely to have more sexual action, or like be more sexually active. Like 20 to 30, that's usually the most sexually active years. So that's why it's really important to check that. And it's not an invasive, time-consuming test. That's essentially, I actually found out that a lot of people don't know about that. So when you go to a gynecologist and you get a pap smear, that's what's that's like the cervix check is pap smear, and it's collecting like a small sample of cells from your cervix with like a little brush. So they actually scrape off a bit of cells from your cervix, and they send them to get tested for any like unusual growth. And you know, this is a very fast, simple, commonly used test that really is incredibly important and should be done regardless of age, actually. And it's also wild when I think about that. In many countries, you, for example, like you can get birth control without any check. like, you're just handed out the prescription, because again, there's like this focus on controlling reproductive systems of people, but this like actual health issue is not addressed from early age, and that all just contributes to not stigma just around sex, but stigma around one's genitals as well, because we don't really know what's down there, and we don't want anyone foreign, any like new doctor to see them, to show them what's going down there. And we're also, because we know we haven't been tested or haven't received any care for so long, we're scared to get the results. I know a lot of people who are like, oh, I don't want to go there because I don't want to find out if, something's wrong with me. And it's just making all this, a huge mess that is slowly but very visibly and very painfully harming people and harming their physical lives, but also mental lives. And it really like contributes to like victims of sexual abuse not receiving proper care, disabled people, poor people not receiving proper care, and it's just outrageous in my view. And I feel like I have gotten everything I had on my heart out. Do the girls from the festival, do they want to take over? Or should I still be blabbing? I'll just send a message. Maybe I can still talk about what I want to do now with my research, because I'll just unmute Valerie. So I am planning, of course, to write this whole thesis. That will be great fun to do. But I don't want to just stop at that, because, I have so much valuable research, and I'm just very passionate about it, as you could probably hear in the past hour. So I'm planning to just start off by kind of translating my work into more accessible materials that I will mostly publish on my Instagram. That's like my #1 platform where I do sex education and activism in general. It's at Anavim with 1 instead of I, so feel free to check it out. And I will just be like slowly unveiling what I learned. I will be publishing reviews of the actual Berlin STI centers. And in the long term, I would like to work together with more sex educators, with maybe Checkpoint Berlin or other like places like that, and actually really contribute to and work on some sort of reformative action to make this situation better in the long term. And yeah, that's it from me.
Okay. Thank you very much, Anna. It was really nice, really interesting. Thank you so much. Okay, if there are any further questions, we would just close the meeting, or you have to close it because you are the host now. Okay. And just for all of you, tomorrow there will be the streaming of the film Daughter, as Katja said in the beginning. And the next day on Sunday, we will close our festival with a reading of Dora Kapralova. You can find all the information on Facebook and on our website, in feminisveritas.com. Yes, I think it's .com. Okay, so thank you very much again, Anna.
Thank you.
It's .de. Sorry.
Thank you. Okay. Yes. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.